My name is Eleanor Christine Whitfield. I was born in Cardiff, Wales, in the year 1930. My mother Vera died during the war in 1936 when I was just 6 years old. My father Edmund passed away when I was 15, in 1945. The only surviving family I had left in this world was my Aunt Cecilia. By 1950, when I turned 20, I inherited my father's property and his business, honey making, which was based in South Africa. Because of that inheritance, I was told to relocate there and oversee things personally. I refused. I was buried deep in my studies at Oxford and had no intention of abandoning them for anything. I told my aunt I would make the journey to Africa once my studies were complete. So Aunt Cecilia took it upon herself to manage my father's business in my stead. She never failed to write to me. Her letters came regularly, always full of complaints about the heat and the harshness of the place. But she never failed to mention that my father's house was something truly extraordinary. She described it in such vivid detail that I found myself lying in my Oxford dormitory at night, trying to picture it. Vast rooms, endless fields, beds of flowers stretching as far as the eye could see. My father had spent years telling me about Africa. He swore it was the finest place on earth and had built that enormous house there for that very reason, so he could stay permanently. Honestly, the idea never appealed to me. Growing up, my history classes painted Africa as a savage and barbaric continent, a place no white person could survive due to the suffocating heat and the clouds of disease carrying mosquitoes. But I could never quite accept that version of things, because my father returned from every trip there looking perfectly healthy and more alive than ever. What troubled me more was how my father spoke about the people. He despised them. He insulted them constantly, calling them every awful name imaginable. The only quality he ever acknowledged in them was their capacity for hard work. He would sit across from me after returning from one of his trips and tell stories about his servants at the bee farm, laughing at how gullible they were, mocking the way they looked, treating their entire existence as one long joke at their expense. Those memories sat uncomfortably with me even then. But I was young, and I said nothing. Now it was my turn to take over his empire, and I was going to see everything with my own eyes. In the evening of April 17th, 1960, I arrived in South Africa by ship. Standing on the dock waiting for me were two figures, my Aunt Cecilia and a young African woman named Stella, who was one of my father's servants. I had read about Stella in my father's diary before leaving England. He had written extensively about all his servants, describing each one in detail. Stella was the head of the household, the woman responsible for keeping everything running. She was slender, attractive, and carried herself with quiet confidence. The moment she saw me, she smiled warmly and without hesitation took my heavy luggage directly from my hands and loaded it into the waiting wagon herself. I watched with genuine amazement at how effortlessly she lifted bags that had been straining my own arms all morning. I asked her if she needed any help. She laughed softly and told me to relax, that this was nothing compared to what she carried at the shamba every day. I had no idea what a shamba was. Aunt Cecilia explained it meant farm in Swahili, then ushered me into the wagon, telling me dinner was waiting at home and that I needed to rest after the long journey. As we drove away, I noticed Stella had been left standing alone on the dock. I asked why she wasn't coming with us. Aunt Cecilia said simply that there was no room for her in the wagon, and that she could walk home. I said nothing, but something about the casualness of it unsettled me. During the drive, I couldn't stop staring out of the wagon window at the people of South Africa moving through the streets around us. They weren't what my father had described. They weren't ugly or frightening. If anything, I felt my father had been wildly dramatic in his descriptions. But there were things I saw along the road that genuinely disturbed me. A man stood on a street corner with a cigarette hanging from his lip, and without any apparent concern for the people around him, He opened his mouth and deposited a thick, revolting glob of mucus directly onto the ground, right beside a young boy selling fruit from a small table. My stomach turned. Further along, near a rubbish dump, I saw something even worse. A man who simply pulled down his trousers and squatted in full view of everyone passing by. I pressed my hand over my eyes immediately, but not before catching a glimpse of something that both shocked and fascinated me in equal measure. I had never seen anything like it in Wales. I was quite certain no man back home could compare. We arrived at my father's house as the last of the evening light faded, and even in near darkness the place was staggering. Calling it large would have been an insult. It was vast, a building so enormous I was certain it could swallow 1,000 people without difficulty. The fields surrounding it seemed to go on forever, and even in the dim light I could make out what appeared to be waves of flowers moving gently in the warm evening breeze. I understood then why my father built his life around this place. As the wagon rolled slowly through the grounds, I heard children's voices in the darkness, laughter, running feet, the sounds of pure, uncomplicated joy. I hadn't expected that. Nobody had mentioned children. Stella had somehow arrived before us and had already organised the other servants to carry my luggage inside. And Aunt Cecilia walked me through the house, room after room, corridor after corridor, before finally leading me to my bedroom. By the time we arrived, the luggage was already unpacked and arranged, and a dish of food sat steaming on the table waiting for me. It was some kind of cow stew that looked questionable at first glance, but the moment the aroma reached me, my entire opinion changed. I changed into lighter clothes and sat down to eat. The meat was extraordinary, rich and deeply flavoured, and unlike anything I had ever tasted in England. The only problem was the spice. It was absolutely ferocious. I drank several cups of water, trying to manage the burning in my mouth, but I finished every last bit on the plate and immediately wanted more. My mouth simply refused to cooperate with my appetite for a second serving. Aunt Cecilia watched me eat with quiet amusement and told me that this was just a small introduction to the kind of food I would be eating every day here. She called the place a paradise, with the small inconvenience of the heat. I told her my light clothes would handle the heat just fine, then mentioned that tomorrow would be a busy day for both of us. She corrected me. Tomorrow would be a busy day for me alone, because she was leaving for England in the morning. The news hit me like cold water. I told wartime didn't allow for anything more. We had only truly been together twice in all that time, and neither occasion had been particularly memorable. Aunt Cecilia looked at me with an expression caught somewhere between sympathy and disbelief. She asked if I was happy, and I told her to look at my face and answer the question herself. She understood immediately. She told me that once I threw myself into the work here, these feelings would sort themselves out, then kissed me on the cheek and went to bed. After she left, I lay down and tried to sleep. It was completely impossible. The bed was perfectly comfortable, but the heat was relentless. The electricity in the house was running low, and the ceiling fan turned so slowly it was practically decorative. Sweat soaked through everything. After lying there in growing frustration, I finally gave up, found my cigarettes and matches in my bag, and walked outside. The change was immediate and extraordinary. Cool air swept over my entire body the moment I stepped through the door. I stood still for a long moment with my eyes closed, just breathing. And then I lit a cigarette and stood there looking out over the vast dark fields, watching the flowers move in the breeze, listening to the silence. This was what my father meant. Standing there in that cool African night, I finally felt it. The thing he could never properly explain in words. There was a peace here that Europe had completely forgotten how to offer. Back home, there was nothing but noise, the constant thundering of artillery, the shrieking of planes overhead, the smell of gunpowder so thick in the air it sat on the back of your throat permanently. People jumping at every sound, living under a sky that might kill them at any moment. I had grown so accustomed to it that I hadn't realized how deeply exhausted I was until I stood in that field and felt the absence of all of it. And I walked slowly through the flowers for about an hour, breathing in their fragrance, letting my mind go quiet. Then I turned to head back inside and heard something that stopped me completely. Moaning, coming from somewhere not far ahead of me in the darkness. Growing louder with every second. I should have turned around. I know that now. But curiosity has always been a failing of mine. I crept forward quietly, and what I found I was entirely unprepared for. A black man and a woman, together in the field, completely lost in each other. The man moved with a powerful and unhurried confidence that made everything I had experienced in my own marriage feel embarrassingly inadequate by comparison. The woman beneath him was not being quiet about her feelings on the matter. She clung to him and pulled him closer and made sounds I had genuinely never heard a woman make before. I stood there frozen. I was supposed to be disgusted. I kept telling myself that. But the truth was I couldn't look away, and worse, I couldn't stop the wave of longing that moved through me. I had never been touched the way this woman was being touched, not once in my life. Then the woman's voice cut through the night sharply, demanding he not finish until she was satisfied, telling him she was leaving tomorrow and might not return, telling him to give her everything he had. My blood went cold. I knew that voice. I stayed and watched in silent disbelief as things reached their conclusion. The woman crying out in full satisfaction, the man finishing moments later, the two of them lying still in the grass. Then the woman rose, misstraightened herself, and without any apparent warning delivered a sharp, hard slap across the man's face. He absorbed it without a word and quietly walked away into the darkness. The woman stepped into the moonlight. Aunt Cecilia. I pressed both hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My proper letter-writing, business-managing Aunt Cecilia, who had spoken to me over dinner about supervising servants and managing bee farms, had just been conducting herself in a dark field with an African man in a manner that would have made the entirety of Cardiff faint dead away. Before I could process a single thought further, the ground shook. A tremendous explosion tore through the night somewhere in the distance, sending a shockwave rolling across the fields. The Aunt Cecilia scrambled to compose herself and disappeared quickly toward the house. Her companion vanished into the darkness without a sound. I stood perfectly still. I was used to explosions. This one was nothing, barely a tremor compared to what I had grown up listening to in Europe. I waited a moment, then walked calmly back to the house and went to bed. I lay in the dark for a long time with my eyes open, thinking about everything I had seen since arriving in this country. The man on the street, the vast, impossible house, the children laughing in the dark fields, my aunt in the moonlight. I had been in South Africa for less than one full day. Sometime later, I had no idea of the hour. I was pulled out of my thoughts by a heavy, urgent knocking at the front door of the house. Then Stella's voice, alarmed and sharp. Then a man's voice, low and breathless and exhausted. I got up. I wrapped myself and moved quietly through the dark corridor toward the sound. The front door was open and moonlight was pouring through it. Standing in the doorway was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a torn and soaking military uniform, carrying an elderly white man across his back. The older man was wounded and barely conscious. Stella stood before them with her hand over her mouth, asking her brother what he was doing here, whether the war was over, whether that was Colonel Haynes. The man, her brother, told her there was no time for questions and that the colonel needed help immediately. He stepped inside and looked up and saw me standing in the corridor. For one brief moment, we simply looked at each other. Then he turned his attention back to the wounded man on his back and said nothing more. I stood in the doorway of my father's house in the middle of an African night, staring at this exhausted, soaking, determined stranger, and felt something move inside me that I could not name and was not yet ready to examine. His name was Thomas Dumas. Everyone called him Tom because his name in the local tongue meant lion. He and Stella had grown up together not far from here, their parents killed when an artillery shell destroyed their home during the war, leaving nothing behind. Colonel Robert Haynes had taken them both under his wing afterwards. Stella came to work at this house. Tom went to the battlefields. He had been fighting for years, and just days before appearing at that door, he and Colonel Haynes had barely escaped with their lives, uncovering a German spy hidden within their own squadron, fleeing their burning base under fire, abandoning a failing plane over a river, swimming to shore with a wounded old man in tow, then walking miles through the African countryside on foot until he reached the only place he knew to come, home, to Stella. And now, without either of us intending